I also wanted to make a comment technically about self-esteem. So I spent a lot of time analyzing self-esteem psychometrically because as a clinician, I was extremely skeptical of the social psychological research purporting to indicate, for example, that there was even such a thing as self-esteem. Because we bandy about these words, but that doesn't mean they have a corresponding grounding in reality. So I looked at and conducted factor analytic studies, which were designed to assess what exactly self-esteem was. And it's quite straightforward. And people who are listening might find this extremely useful practically. There's no such thing as self-esteem. What there is trait neuroticism, which is proclivity to anxiety and pain, essentially, emotional and physical. So people differ in their thresholds for being anxious and hurt. And if you're more sensitive, well, then you'll see threats before people who are less sensitive, and that can be useful. And if you're less sensitive, well, then you're more robust and maybe more daring, and that can be useful. No, there's no way of saying what's right in that situation. However, if you're high in neuroticism, if you're high in sensitivity to negative emotion, you do experience a lot of anxiety and depression. Okay, so self-esteem is basically neuroticism minus extroversion. And extroversion is the positive emotion dimension. And so highly neurotic people, so people sensitive to negative emotion, are more likely to be self-conscious and to think negative thoughts about themselves. But that doesn't mean that it's a fractured self-concept that's driving the negative emotion. That's simply not true. That negative emotional state is actually baseline temperament. You can measure it in infants. You can measure it in kids that are 6 months old, and you can ameliorate it to some degree. If you have a child who's sensitive to negative emotion and you facilitate their exploration, their autonomous exploration, they can normalize their psychophysiology. Okay, so first of all, there's no such thing as self-esteem. It's basically trait neuroticism. And second, you do not remediate trait neuroticism by getting people to focus on their feelings. In fact, making people self-conscious about their feelings makes trait neuroticism worse because there's no difference between being self-conscious and being high in trait neuroticism. So, and then the last part of all of that that's preposterous is you certainly don't remediate people's self-esteem. You talk about this in your book with regards to overpraise by continually telling children how wonderful they are. Because what actually regulates their negative emotion, to say it again, isn't their internal psychological state or their attitude towards themselves. It's whether or not other people like to have them around. So if you have a child who's very popular, surrounded by friends, who's got a couple of best friends, whose teachers respond positively to them, who other parents respond to well, who can regulate their behavior when they're out in public in a grocery store or a restaurant so that adults are kind and smile to them, the probability that they're going to experience excess negative emotion is tremendously ameliorated. And so that's another strike on the conservative side, like a hit on the conservative side of the parenting spectrum. It's like you help make your children socially acceptable and you will increase their self-esteem. You don't do that by giving them participation awards at school and falsely inflating their ego.